Have you ever had a dream that stayed with you long after you woke up? Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt real. So real that for a moment you forgot where you were. And in that dream, someone from your past appears. Your ex. You see them clearly. You feel the emotions again. The familiarity. The connection. Maybe even the intimacy. And when you wake up, something feels off. Not necessarily sadness. Not necessarily longing. But confusion. Because you thought you had already moved on. You thought that chapter of your life was closed. So why would your mind bring them back now? Why would it recreate something that no longer exists? Most people answer this question in the simplest way possible. They assume, I must still have feelings for them. Or, maybe I miss them more than I thought. But Carl Jung believed this kind of interpretation misses something much deeper. Because dreams are not direct reflections of reality. They are symbolic expressions of the unconscious mind. And the unconscious does not communicate in literal terms. It speaks in images, in emotions, in symbols. Now this is where things begin to change. Because if dreams are symbolic, then the people who appear in them are not always who they seem to be. They are representations, not necessarily of themselves, but of something connected to your inner world. Now think about this for a moment. Your mind could show you anything while you dream. Any memory, any situation, any random image. But instead, it chooses a very specific person. Someone who once had a strong emotional connection to you. Someone tied to a particular period of your life. Someone connected to a version of yourself that no longer exists in the same way. And that choice is not random, because the unconscious mind selects symbols that carry emotional meaning. It does not choose neutral figures. It chooses people and experiences that are loaded with psychological significance. Now here is where most people misunderstand their dreams. They focus on the person, instead of asking, what does this person represent in my mind? Because your ex is not just a person in your memory. They are associated with a certain emotional state, a certain identity you had at the time, a certain way you experienced connection, a certain version of yourself. And when your unconscious brings them into a dream, it is not necessarily trying to bring them back. It is trying to bring attention to something connected to that experience, something within you. Now here is where it becomes even more interesting. Dreams often intensify emotions. They recreate feelings in a way that feels immediate and real. This is why dreams can feel more powerful than ordinary memories, because they are not simply recalling the past. They are activating it. And when that emotional activation happens, it can feel like something unresolved is still alive. But this does not mean the past itself is returning. It means something connected to that past has not been fully understood. Now this is something Carl Jung emphasized deeply. He believed that dreams are not trying to repeat the past. They are trying to reveal something about the present. The unconscious mind is not interested in nostalgia. It is interested in balance, in awareness, in bringing hidden aspects of the psyche into consciousness. So when a person appears in your dream, especially someone with emotional significance, the real question is not, why are they here? But, what part of me is being expressed through them? Because the unconscious does not speak in direct language. It does not say, you are feeling this, or you need to understand that. Instead, it creates a scenario, a symbolic experience, a moment that feels real enough to capture your attention. And within that moment, it hides meaning. Now here is something most people never consider. The same person can appear in your dreams for completely different reasons at different times in your life. At one point, they may represent love, connection, emotional closeness. At another point, they may represent loss, regret, confusion. And at another stage, they may represent something entirely different. Growth, identity, a part of yourself that existed during that time. This is why interpreting dreams requires more than looking at the surface. It requires looking at the emotional meaning behind the symbol. Because your ex is not just your ex in the dream. They are a doorway, a symbol your mind is using to point towards something deeper, something internal, something psychological, something you may not yet fully understand. Now this is where the real exploration begins. Because once you stop taking dreams literally, you begin asking better questions. Not, do I still want them? But, what does this experience represent within me? And that shift in perspective changes everything. Because instead of looking outward, you begin looking inward. And that is exactly where Carl Jung believed the answers always exist. But understanding the symbolic nature of dreams is only the first step. Because even if the dream is not about the person, there is still a reason your mind chose that person. Out of all the people in your life, out of all the memories stored in your mind, why that specific connection? And the answer lies in something far more powerful than simple memory. Emotional imprint. Because some experiences don't just pass through us. They stay with us. And understanding that imprint is where the dream begins to reveal its deeper meaning. If dreams are not literal, then why does your mind return to someone so specific? Why not a stranger? Why not a random memory? Why someone who once held such a strong place in your life? To understand this, we need to look at something Carl Jung considered deeply important: the emotional imprint. Because not all experiences affect us in the same way. Some moments pass through our lives almost unnoticed. We forget them quickly. They leave no lasting trace. But other experiences leave something behind, a psychological mark, a kind of emotional residue that stays within the mind long after the experience itself has ended. And relationships, especially intimate ones, are some of the strongest sources of these imprints. Think about it. A relationship is not just about another person. It is about shared emotions, vulnerability, identity, connection, meaning. During a relationship, you are not just interacting with someone else. You are also experiencing a version of yourself, a version shaped by that connection. The way you felt, the way you thought, the way you saw yourself in that moment of your life. And when the relationship ends, the person may leave, but the imprint often remains. Now here is something most people never fully realize. The unconscious mind does not measure time in the same way the conscious mind does. To your conscious mind, the relationship may feel like it belongs to the past. You may believe you have moved on. You may no longer think about that person regularly. But the unconscious stores emotional experiences differently. It stores them based on intensity, not time. So if a relationship carried strong emotional weight, that imprint does not simply disappear. It remains available within the psyche. And sometimes, under the right conditions, it becomes active again. Now this is where dreams come in. Dreams are one of the ways the unconscious reactivates stored emotional material. Not to replay the past, but to process it, to understand it, to integrate it. And when an emotional imprint has not been fully processed, the mind may return to it through dreams. Now, this does not mean you consciously want to return to that relationship. It means something connected to that experience still exists within you, something that has not been fully resolved. And this is where many people misunderstand their dreams. They assume the presence of the X means desire, but often it means memory, not intellectual memory, but emotional memory, because emotional memory is not about facts. It is about feeling. And feelings do not disappear simply because we decide to move forward. They fade, they change, but they can remain stored beneath the surface. Now here is where it becomes deeper. Sometimes what the mind brings back is not even the person themselves, but the emotional state associated with them. For example, a feeling of being understood, a sense of connection, a version of yourself that felt more alive, a period of your life that carried meaning. Your X becomes a symbol for that emotional experience. And when your current life touches something similar, or lacks something similar, the unconscious may return to that symbol, not to bring the person back, but to bring the feeling back into awareness. Now this is something most people never consciously recognize. The mind does not just remember people. It remembers how you felt with them. And sometimes what you miss is not the person, but the way you felt when you were with them. And that feeling becomes attached to their image. So when the unconscious wants to revisit that emotional state, it uses the most powerful symbol it has, your X. Now here is something even more subtle. Emotional imprints are not always about positive experiences. Sometimes they are connected to unresolved conflict, confusion, emotional pain, unanswered questions. In these cases, the dream is not trying to recreate something enjoyable. It is trying to complete something unfinished. Because the psyche seeks resolution. It seeks clarity. It seeks understanding. And if something ended without that understanding, the unconscious may continue returning to it, again and again, not to trap you in the past, but to help you process it. Now this is where Carl Jung's perspective becomes very important. He believed that the unconscious is not working against you. It is working toward balance, toward integration, toward making the hidden parts of your experience visible. So when your X appears in your dreams, it is not necessarily a sign of regression. It may be a sign of processing, a sign that your mind is still working through something connected to that experience, something emotional, something psychological, something that has not yet fully settled. And this is why simply ignoring these dreams rarely resolves them, because they are not random. They are signals that something within you is asking to be understood. But emotional imprints are only one part of the picture, because even if something remains within you, the mind still chooses a very specific form to express it, a very specific image. And that image is not random either. Because in Jungian psychology, the people we connect with in relationships often represent something deeper than we realize. Something not just external, but internal. An archetype. And understanding that archetype changes the meaning of these dreams completely. If emotional imprints explain why your mind returns to the past, there is still a deeper question left unanswered. Why does it return to that specific person? Why your ex? Why not someone else? Why not a random memory? To understand this, we need to move into one of Carl Jung's most profound ideas, the concept of the anima and animus. Jung believed that every human being carries within them an inner image of the opposite gender. For men, this is called the anima. For women, the animus. But this is not about gender in a simple sense. It is about the psychological qualities we associate with connection, emotion, attraction, and relationship. These inner figures shape how we experience others, how we fall in love, how we connect, how we perceive intimacy. Now here is where it becomes deeply important. When you enter a relationship, you are not just connecting with another person. You are also projecting parts of your inner world onto them. You see in them something that resonates with your internal image, something that feels meaningful, familiar, almost as if they represent something you have been looking for. But what you are often responding to is not just who they are, but what they symbolize within you. Now this is where most people misunderstand relationships. They believe they are only connecting with the other person. But Jung would say they are also connecting with their own unconscious. And the person becomes a carrier of that projection. They represent a feeling you desire, a quality you admire, a part of yourself you have not yet developed, an emotional experience that feels meaningful. Now think about what happens after the relationship ends. The person is no longer present in your life, but the psychological meaning you attach to them does not disappear, because it was never entirely about them. It was also about what they represented within you. And this is why your ex can appear in your dreams long after the relationship has ended. Because the unconscious is not necessarily bringing back the person. It is bringing back the symbol. Now this is where it becomes even more interesting. The same person can represent different things at different stages of your life. At one point, they may represent emotional connection, intimacy, understanding. At another stage, they may represent loss, confusion, lessons you learned. And at a deeper level, they may represent something entirely internal, a part of yourself that was activated during that relationship, a version of yourself that existed in that dynamic. And when your mind brings them into your dreams, it may be pointing toward that internal aspect. Now here is something most people never consider. You may not be dreaming about your ex. You may be dreaming about a part of yourself, a part that was expressed, discovered, or experienced through that relationship. For example, if you felt more confident during that time, your ex may symbolize that confidence. If you felt more emotionally open, they may symbolize that openness. If you felt deeply understood, they may represent that sense of connection. And when your current life touches something related to those qualities, the unconscious may bring that symbol back, not to remind you of the person, but to reconnect you with the state of being associated with them. Now this becomes even more complex when we consider intimacy in dreams. Dreams involving closeness or physical connection are often misunderstood. People assume they indicate desire, but Jung would suggest something deeper. These dreams often represent integration, a merging of different aspects of the psyche, the attempt of the mind to reconnect with something that feels incomplete, not necessarily a desire to return to the person, but a desire to reconnect with the experience, the feeling, or the part of yourself that was present during that time. Now this is where the meaning of the dream begins to shift completely. Because instead of asking, "Do I still want them?" You begin asking, what part of myself is this dream trying to bring back into awareness? And that question opens an entirely different level of understanding. Because the dream is no longer about the past. It is about your present psychological state. What you feel now. What you need now. What is missing, unresolved, or trying to be integrated. Now here is the deeper truth Jung pointed toward. Relationships are not just external experiences. They are psychological events. They shape the way we understand ourselves. They activate parts of our identity. They reveal aspects of our inner world. And when they end, those aspects do not simply disappear. They remain within the psyche, waiting to be understood, waiting to be integrated, waiting to become part of a more complete self. And sometimes, they return through dreams, not to bring you back to the person, but to bring you closer to yourself. But even this is not the full picture, because while symbols and archetypes explain what your mind is showing you, there is still a reason it keeps returning to the same experience. Again, and again, and again. And that reason lies in something even more powerful than memory or symbolism. The need for closure. Because the human mind does not easily let go of what it does not fully understand. And when something feels unfinished, the unconscious has a way of bringing it back until it is. There is something about the human mind that most people don't fully understand. It does not like incomplete stories. It does not like unanswered questions. It does not like emotional experiences that end without clarity. When something feels unfinished, the mind holds on to it, not always consciously, but beneath the surface. And this is where many dreams about your ex begin. Not because the relationship still exists, but because something within it was never fully resolved. Now think about how most relationships actually end. Rarely with complete understanding. Rarely with perfect closure. Most of the time, they end with things left unsaid, emotions left unexpressed, questions left unanswered, meanings left unclear. And even if you tell yourself you've moved on, the unconscious mind may not feel the same way, because it is not looking for a logical conclusion. It is looking for emotional completion. Now here is where it becomes interesting. Closure is not something that always happens externally. It is something that happens internally. You may never get the explanation you wanted. You may never have the final conversation. You may never fully understand what went wrong. But the psyche still tries to make sense of it, still tries to complete the story. And when it cannot do this consciously, it does it through dreams. Now this is where most people misunderstand what their mind is doing. They think the dream is pulling them backward, reopening something that should be closed. But often the opposite is true. The dream is trying to close what was never fully processed. Now imagine a loop, an experience that started, but never reached a clear ending. The mind does not simply forget it. It keeps returning to it, not randomly, but intentionally, trying to understand, trying to resolve, trying to complete. And your ex becomes the symbol through which this loop is expressed. Now here is something deeper. Unfinished cycles are not always about the relationship itself. Sometimes they are about how you felt during it, how it changed your identity, how it ended, what it made you realize about yourself. For example, if you felt misunderstood, the cycle may not be about that person. It may be about your need to be understood. If you felt rejected, The dream may not be about them. It may be about your relationship with rejection. If you felt incomplete, the dream may be about a part of yourself that is still searching for resolution. Now this is where the dream becomes a psychological process, not a memory, not a desire, but an attempt at integration. The mind is not asking you to go back. It is asking you to understand, to see something clearly, to process something fully, to reach a point where the experience no longer feels open-ended. Now here is something most people never consciously realize. The more you avoid understanding an experience, the more the unconscious returns to it. Because avoidance does not resolve anything. It only delays it. And the unconscious does not forget. It simply waits, and then expresses itself when your mind is quiet, when you are asleep, when your defenses are lowered. Now here is where dreams can feel confusing, because they do not present answers directly. They present scenarios, moments, interactions. They recreate the emotional atmosphere of the experience, so that you can feel it again, not to suffer from it, but to finally understand it. Now this can feel uncomfortable, because the emotions may return. The confusion, the questions, the sense of something unfinished. But this discomfort has a purpose. It is guiding your attention. It is pointing towards something that still needs clarity. Now here is the deeper insight. The mind does not repeat what is resolved. It repeats what is unresolved. So if your ex continues appearing in your dreams, it is not necessarily about the person. It is about something within you that has not yet reached completion. Something that is still open, still active, still seeking understanding. And once that understanding is reached, the need for repetition begins to fade, because the cycle is complete. Now this is where Carl Jung's perspective becomes incredibly important. He believed that the unconscious does not try to trap us in the past. It tries to bring us toward wholeness, toward integration, toward a deeper understanding of ourselves. And sometimes, the only way to move forward is to fully understand what we have already experienced. But even this is not the final layer, because while unfinished cycles explain why the dream keeps returning, there is still something even deeper happening, something that can be difficult to accept. Because sometimes, what your ex represents in your dreams is not just a memory, not just an unresolved experience, but a reflection of parts of yourself that you may not have fully seen or fully accepted. And this is where Jung's idea of the shadow becomes unavoidable. Because sometimes, the person you think you are dreaming about is actually a mirror of something within you. By now, the meaning of these dreams has already begun to shift. What once seemed like a simple memory has revealed itself as something far more complex. A symbol, an emotional imprint, an unfinished cycle. But beneath all of this lies one final layer. The one Carl Jung believed most people spend their lives avoiding. The shadow. Because sometimes the person who appears in your dreams is not just connected to your past. They are connected to parts of yourself you have not fully seen or fully accepted. Now this may feel uncomfortable at first, because when we think about our ex, we usually think about them as separate from us. Their personality, their actions, their behavior. But Jung believed something very different. He believed that relationships are not just connections between two people. They are reflections. mirrors through which we encounter parts of our own psyche. Now here is where it becomes deeply important. During a relationship, we often project parts of ourselves onto the other person. We may see them as more confident than we feel, more complete than we feel, more emotionally stable than we feel. Or sometimes, we project things we do not want to accept: insecurity, jealousy, fear, emotional dependence. And because these qualities are uncomfortable, we attach them to the other person. We say, "They are like this. They caused this. They made me feel that way." But Jung would say that many of these reactions are not just about the other person. They are also about what exists within us. Now this is where the shadow appears. The shadow is made up of everything we do not want to identify with. The traits we reject, the emotions we suppress, the aspects of ourselves we push away. And these parts do not disappear. They remain in the unconscious, influencing us quietly, until something brings them into awareness. Now this is where dreams become incredibly important, because dreams are one of the ways the shadow reveals itself. Not directly, but symbolically. And your ex can become one of those symbols. Now think about this for a moment. What did that relationship reveal in you? Not in them, in you. What emotions came out that you had never experienced so strongly before? What patterns did you notice in yourself? What parts of your personality became visible during that time? Because often, relationships activate parts of us that we do not normally see. They bring out vulnerability, attachment, fear of loss, desire for connection, need for validation. And after the relationship ends, we often try to move on from those experiences. We try to forget them. We try to disconnect from that version of ourselves. But the unconscious does not work that way. It does not erase. It integrates, or at least it tries to. And when something has not been fully accepted, it returns. Now this is where the dream becomes a mirror. Your ex appears, but what they represent is not just the person. It is the psychological experience tied to them. It is the part of you that existed in that relationship. And sometimes, it is the part of you that you have not fully accepted since it ended. Now here is something most people never consider. You may not be dreaming about your ex. You may be dreaming about your own shadow, the parts of yourself that were activated in that relationship, the parts that you may have judged, rejected, or tried to leave behind. Now this is where the dream becomes uncomfortable. Because instead of asking, "Why am I thinking about them?" you begin asking, "What part of myself is this dream showing me?" And that question requires honesty, because the shadow is not always easy to face. It may contain insecurity you don't want to admit, emotional dependence you don't want to recognize, patterns you would rather ignore. But Jung believed that true psychological growth comes from integrating the shadow, not denying it, not projecting it, but understanding it. Because the parts of ourselves we reject do not disappear. They continue influencing us unconsciously until we bring them into awareness. Now this is where the meaning of the dream becomes clear. The dream is not pulling you backward. It is pointing inward. It is asking you to look at something within yourself, something that was revealed through that relationship, something that is still part of you. Now here is the final insight. The goal is not to go back. The goal is to understand. Because once you understand what the dream is showing you, once you recognize the part of yourself that is being reflected, once you integrate that experience into your awareness, the need for the dream begins to fade, because the message has been received. And this is what Carl Jung meant when he said that the unconscious seeks wholeness. It does not bring things back to confuse you. It brings them back to complete you. So perhaps the real meaning behind dreaming about your ex is not about the past at all. It is about the parts of yourself that are still becoming conscious. And once those parts are understood, the dream is no longer needed, because you are no longer searching outside for something that already exists within you.